I'm Michael Banfield, and in this video I'm comparing the Boss DS1, DS2 and MD2. Now I want to roughly break down the video into three parts. So part one, I want to do a quick comparison of the three pedals just straight into a clean amp so you can hear that. Part two, I wanted to talk through a few tips and tricks that I think you might find useful on how to get the most out of these pedals. Sometimes it's not quite as simple as just plugging them into your existing rig. So there's a few things I want to talk about there. And then part three, I wanted to do a much deeper dive into the real subtle differences between these three pedals and how you can use the strengths and weaknesses of each of the three to help you decide on which playing style you're going to use them for. So let's start with that quick comparison into the clean amp. So let's go through some tips on how to make these pedals sound the best. Now, one of the main things I think that completely changes the sound of the distortion that you're getting is to combine it with an overdrive. So traditionally this would be an overdrive from your amp, you know, just having your amp cranked up and slightly overdriven. That's a great way to do it. I've decided to use a Boss OD3 here just because it kind of fits in nicely with the trio of Boss pedals we've already got, and it means I can press the pedal on and off so you can hear the difference in the sound with and without the overdrive. I'm not saying that the sound without the overdrive is bad. It might be the sound that you're after. Certainly for kind of brash punk and rock stuff, it can be sometimes just what you want. It's in the similar vein to plugging like directly into a recording console, where punk bands used to do that, just plug a distortion pedal right into the console, even without an amp. And it has a certain charm to it, but what tends to happen is the top end gets really fizzy and the bottom end is very woolly, and using the distortion pedal with an overdrive of some sort instead and stacking it on top of that overdrive just focuses the sound. So I'll stop talking about it and just let you hear it. So here's the clean sound. Here's the overdrive. And then I'll use some of the distortion pedals, just occasionally switching the overdrive off so you can hear it with and without. Another thing I think that is worth mentioning is to make sure that you're using a guitar speaker in your amp that you like the sound of distortion with. I did a video a little while ago comparing a British style speaker with an American style speaker, and I learned a lot from that. I decided with high gain distortion stuff, I generally preferred the British sounding speaker. A lot of the other stuff, like cleaner sounds or mid-driven sounds, I actually preferred the American style stuff. So it's totally subjective, but it's something that you should be aware of when you're trying to get a really good distortion sound. Make sure you're using a speaker that you know you like the voice of. Otherwise, you could be trying pedals all day and the problem isn't with the pedals, it could be with the speaker. Before we have a deeper look into the precise differences between these pedals, do consider clicking the like button, maybe subscribing to the channel, just because I don't really know whether anyone's finding this content useful without that. Also, if you'd like to leave a comment just with any other suggestions on comparison videos, or if you'd like to just share which pedal you like the best, that would be really interesting to know. Let's do a deeper dive now into the sounds of the Boss DS1. The overall tone of the DS1 in terms of the bass response, I feel, is in a really nice sweet spot. It's got more bass response than the DS2, but less available than the MD2. The MD2 has loads, which we'll get onto later, but it has a nice amount of bass response. It's nice and full, but not kind of super overpowering or anything. It's still got a nice mid-range grittiness to the sound. The tone control, I think, is worth mentioning, and you've just got to kind of be careful with the tone control. If you crank it, it doesn't sound too hot. It tends to sound best on those lower settings. So I'll just play that for you with the tone control on a few different settings and see if you can hear what I mean. So I'll start off with the tone control pretty low on the lower settings and then raise it up to those nastier settings, and yeah, see if you can hear what I mean. Now the distortion control is kind of similar, I think. It tends to work best on that kind of noon and below range. Once you get it past noon, for me, it tends to just compress the sound. It's not actually adding that much distortion. It just compresses the sound and makes it less dynamic. And it's also adding a really harsh high end that's not a nice high end. It's the kind of high end that brings out the picking, the attack of your pick touching the string, that clickiness, and the sound of your fingers moving against the strings. It's that really squeaky high end. So again, I'll play with the distortion on a few different settings and see if you can hear what I mean. Let's move on to the DS2 now. So the tone control on the DS2 compared to the DS1, I think, is much more usable. You don't get this weird, like, harsh nasally thing in the high end when you crank the tone control. It sounds better kind of pushing the tone control than it does trying to turn the tone control down. So it's almost a bit the opposite of the DS1. It tends to shine when it's cranked a bit, the tone control on the DS2. So I'll play a little bit of that and see if you can hear what I mean. It just gets a bit woolly on the lower ends, but I think it responds the way it should. It sounds good at any of the settings, really. Distortion control, again, in comparison to the DS1, it's kind of the opposite, I think. It works best about noon or just past noon, anywhere past noon. Once you start to take it lower than halfway, it starts to sound a little bit weedy because it's not got that bass response, that big bass response of the DS1 anymore. The bass response is a little lower, which makes it good for cutting high gain distortion stuff, I think, especially lead sounds, but not so great on cleaner sounds. You can take the tone control down a bit to compensate, but it's just my opinion. It's okay, and it does get very clean as well. It can clean up more than the other pedals. But I'll just play around with the distortion control. I'll lower the tone a bit as I get to the lower gain sounds and see what you think. The DS2 has this really nasally kind of mid boost. It's almost like a cocked wah, and for me it's not a great sound, I think, but for some lead sounds it can be really good, and if you crank the tone control it can be really useful as well. It tends to even out that honkiness of the mid boost that it's given you. So I'll just compare it to the standard setting a little bit so you can hear it, and try the tone control at a few different settings so you can hear how that responds. The Mega Distortion has the most distortion out of all of them, as the name might suggest, and it's got two distortion controls. It's got the main distortion knob and a gain boost knob, which I find is useful to use as almost like a fine tuning dial that adds a bit of texture, a bit of girth to the sound and makes it just a little bit more three-dimensional. I'll play the pedal with a few different gain settings. But it's a nice range. It doesn't really have any bad settings, I think. It probably sounds a bit better towards those higher gain sounds and gets a little bit towards the Metal Zone pedal kind of sound. But they're very responsive controls. They don't have really any bad settings as far as I'm concerned. So have a listen. Tone control works as it should, I think, kind of like the DS1 did. There's no kind of harsh, weird settings or anything on it. The main thing about the EQ section is this added bottom end control. So you can now add loads more low end, great for like drop tunings and just much more modern sounding distortion sounds. So I'll play around with the settings, but to me it sounds best like, you know, pretty high. It defines the sound of the Mega Distortion, I think. On lower settings it just sounds a bit weak and doesn't really do those kind of mid-rangey sounds like the DS1 and things. It doesn't really do those as well. So it's better at those more modern mid-scoop type sounds. So have a listen. To round up this video, I've set the pedals to what I think best define the strengths of each pedal, and I'll switch between them so you can hear the differences in them. But to summarise, the DS1 I think does the low gain distortion sounds the best, that kind of gritty mid-range classic 70s distortion sound the best. The DS2 shines a bit more with the higher gain distortion, brighter sounds, more cutting, particularly really good for lead playing. And the Mega Distortion, the MD2, that's just really good for the really modern low end, really modern high gain, heavy sounds. Drop tunings will sound great with the Mega Distortion. I'll play through, see if you can decide which one is best for you. And if you found this video useful, do remember to like the video, subscribe if you want to. Let me know in the comments which pedal you prefer out of the three. And if there's any other comparison videos you'd like me to do that I might have the equipment to, any other Boss pedal comparisons or anything like that, let me know in the comments, okay? So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on another one.